The very first one of these live technique reviews and Q&As. Now, the plan for today is I'm going to run through some of you guys' technique. I'm going to give you some cues and things to think about, and then how I would adjust your training moving forwards. So we've got a range of lifts from somebody who's 3 weeks into training, all the way to somebody that's aiming for a 210 kilo bench. So there's quite a bit of difference. And then if there is time, I'll answer any remaining questions. I'm just going to check on my phone that this live stream is actually working. With that said, there are two more things before I actually get started. So first one is, if you are watching this and want your technique reviewing, then on Instagram, DM me the word tech1, so TECH1. And if you are on YouTube watching this, there's a QR code on the screen. So what you need to do is you just need to click that, and then you'll be able to put your technique in for me to go through. So with that said, let's get started. Now, we have, I believe, 5 different videos I'm going to go through. So I'm going to go through each of your technique, and I will give the best feedback possible. So first up, we have Tom. Now, Tom is very strong. He's been training for 3 years, and his goal is to get to a 170 bench. So let's have a look at Tom's video. Now, the very first thing we'll notice here is the sheer amount of load. So Tom is, I think this is a, what have we got? That's 120, 165 bench. So this is a big, big bench. Now, when we're looking at bench technique, there's a few things that I like to look at first. So one is, before somebody even unracks, we want to look at the environment and how they're lifting. So for example, with Tom, we can see that he is training in a good quality gym with good plates. So this means he's probably serious about powerlifting. The next thing is, when we look at the setup, I generally like to see the top of the knees below the hips. So we've got that. It's a nice, good, stable position. And then the third thing is the height of the bench for unrack. So you can't always control that, but if you're training somewhere and you have a combo rack or an adjustable rack like Tom does, then you want to make sure you're unracking from a good height and you're not having to do an extra rep. Now, in this circumstance, Tom's got someone giving him a handoff, so that does make it a lot easier. Now, if we just go back to watch the bench, there's a few different things we can look at. So the first thing is, he's obviously very strong, and he seems to get stuck partway off the chest. Now, what most people do is they would say this part here, when the rep is slowest, is where Tom is weakest. But that's not the case. Tom's actually weaker slightly before that. So what we've got here is, this is some software called Tracker, some physics software. It was designed for schools, I think. But basically what we can do is we can look at Tom's movement, we can look at anybody's movement, and we can analyse the bar path, the speed, the velocity, and we can look at this to inform our decisions based on what the reality is. It's not just an eyeball test of what's good, what's bad. We can look at actual data. So what I've done here, if you can see on the screen there, I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see it on Instagram, there's a red circle. So basically I've identified that as a center point of mass, and we're going to track that. So ideally you want to do this from side on, but for the sake of this video is fine. And then if we watch this, we can see the movement over the duration of the rep. Now over here on the right hand side, you've got 2 different graphs. So this top graph here is showing the acceleration. So that is the rate of speed change. It's not the speed, it's how fast your speed is changing. So speed, for example, would be 30 miles an hour. Acceleration would be how fast you can get to 30 miles an hour. So with cars, you talk about top speed and you talk about acceleration. They're 2 different things. And it's the same with your training. So you can have somebody who looks like they're a fast lifter, but their acceleration might not be very good, and the same the other way around. So this is the points of acceleration through the lift. So you can see here where the points are lowest. So the first lowest point of acceleration is just as the bar starts. So this isn't differentiating between going down and going up on this video. We can change it to do that in a second, but I'll show you. And then the second point is at the end of the rep. So that makes sense because he's finished the rep, so there's no reason to keep accelerating. So what we want to do is, if we just change this so that we're only looking at the acceleration from the initiation of the movement, we'll just get rid of the end point there, because that's not really relevant. What we have now is a very clear point at which his acceleration is the least. So what that means is, at that point of the movement, he is not able to be generating a lot of force. That is the part at which the acceleration is slowed down as much as possible. So that coincides with the graph of the distance the bar is moving, so the position of the bar over the course of the rep. So you can see here, there's this stable point. Now most people would see this point of the video where it's flat, where it's plateaued. So if we go here and say that is his weak point. That's not the case, because if you look at this point as the weak point of the movement, this is when he's slowed right down. However, if you watch Tom's acceleration, from this point here, his acceleration improves. So he's actually very strong there. He's able to start producing force out of that position. So that means that it's not a weak point for him. What the actual weak point for Tom is if we go back here, we can see just before is when his acceleration starts falling off a cliff. So this point here is where he's actually weakest. So if we look at that on the video, what that actually looks like is, it's like 2 inches off the chest. He then is able to continue to accelerate and improve the rep. So what this means is Tom's weakness is basically right there. So right before where the speed plateaus and right as the acceleration starts to drop down. So typically, to summarize all of this, he's very weak just off the chest. So what that means is for accessory work, he probably wants to do some front delt work, doesn't need to hammer front delts too much because he had quite a wide grip bench, whereas if you have a narrow grip bench, you typically get more out of training your front delts. I'm not saying you shouldn't train them, you still should, but just relative to the rewards. And then he's going to need to do a lot of work in this position. So what I would like to see is some t-shirt pause benches. So basically you're going to lower the bar so it's just grazing your t-shirt, do your pauses from there and learn to generate power from this position here where the acceleration is starting to fall off, starting to disappear. And then we're going to be looking at 2 other things. So one is to do some slightly increased range of motion benching. Now if we look at Tom's bottom range here, actually it might be better to show you the other video. There you go, that's a bit easy to see. So if we look at the bottom of Tom's bench here, you can see his shoulder is roughly at about 90 degrees. So this is fantastic for powerlifting in that he is minimizing the range of motion that he needs to hit the bench. It's fantastic, that's the best thing for powerlifting. However, from an accessory perspective, we want to get that elbow deeper if possible. So what I would suggest Tom does is 2 different types of accessory. 1, more Larsen presses, so legs straight out in front, and 2, some either cambered bar bench, so you can go deep then full range of motion, or some, it doesn't have to be fully flat, but relatively flat back bench, so that you can get stronger in that bottom part of that range of motion. Now with that said, this is an incredibly strong bench press, so it's not like, I'm not just like, Tom needs to work better on this. He doesn't, but these are the things that I'd look at to improve. Now we could do more stuff with the velocity, but I've already been going on about this for 10 minutes. So we shall move on to the next one. Right, next up we have Dieter. So, Dieter, you submitted a video which was linked to Facebook, but your profile is private, so I couldn't find it. However, you did submit your Instagram, so I've taken this from your Instagram account. It's an old video. I suspect you're much further along now, but I'm just going to give you a quick review of this instead. So Dieter's goal is to get to a 210 bench. So I suspect his current bench is a lot more than this. This is about 1.5 years old. Now, this particular bench, there are a few things that I'd be looking to improve if you want to maximise the returns. So the same as I said before, if we want to look at the environment that we're in first. So the first one is the unrack height. You're having to unrack it so high, that's going to be a problem. Yes, you've got somebody helping you, but it's just, if you have the ability to change your setup, you may as well change your setup. You may as well get every step along the way to be as ideal as possible for you. Next thing is, obviously, we've got the feet up and wearing slippers. So obviously, we know this guy's going to be very strong. But then looking at the actual bench itself, 1, we've got partial range of motion. 2, we've got a friend helping with every rep. So the partial range of motion. The problem with the partial range of motion with something like a bench press is it's all well and good if you can keep it in that exact same range every time. The problem happens when you get strong enough to bench 200 kilos 3/4 of the way. The one day you then bench 210 kilos and you accidentally go into that range you're not used to is when you are liable to end up with a tear, torn pec, torn rotator cuff, shoulder, whatever. The risk in the grand scheme of things is quite low. However, the risk is still there, and the more absolute load you're lifting, the more that risk is. So it would make sense to try and reduce that risk as much as possible. It also means when we are tracking our training, so you might not be a powerlifter, but when you're tracking your training, you want technique that is safe, so inherently safe, not something stupid. It is consistent and it is repeatable. Now, the repeatable part, I like to have objective standards. So, for example, with the bench press, the objective standard, very, very simple, is the bar touches your chest, your arms are locked out at the top. That's it. Simple. Just so it's the same every time. So if you look here, there's more than one rep. If you look at the depth on the first rep, you get to a couple of inches off your chest. If you look at the depth on the second rep, you get almost to your chest. So they are both different reps. So you're training through a different range each time. And then the last thing, which goes along the same vein, is having the spotter help you. Now with that, a spotter being close, fantastic idea, but their hands should not be on the bar. If their hands are on the bar, you don't know, did they help you 10 grams? Did they help you 10 kilos? And they'll say it was all you, bro, and they're just helping and whatever. But you want to lift it yourself, so have them close, but don't have them be spotting you. Like I say, I think you're probably much stronger and much further along than this now, so this might not be relevant for you at all. But I still think this is a good one to have a look at. Now, in terms of actual, what I would suggest somebody in this situation to look at to improve. So the first thing is to standardise your range of motion. So ideally, touch your chest. Now, if you, I don't have the block to hand, it's through there. If you can't get all the way to your chest for some reason, you've got a restriction, an injury, or whatever, what I suggest you do is use something as a marker. So you can get bench blocks. So people used to use wooden boards to do this, but you can get a bench block that attaches, or you can get a pad or something that attaches, so it's a standardised range every time, so you have less risk of something going wrong with that. And then the second thing is your spotters. Just tell them to ease off a little bit. Tell them to back off and not interfere so much with the lift. Right. Is this part of your basics but better package? Yes, it is. So I'm going to, let's see if I can put this on this screen so I can still see it as I go. That might make it a bit easier. Right, I'm just going to check the chat for a few messages. Nick, what's up? Good man. Next up, Chris Tan. I love these videos. Even if I don't submit a video, I learn so much that I can go away and apply it to my next session. Is this part of your basics but better package? You know what it is. I'm not going to go off on a massive sales tangent, but yes. So basics but better, member site, 50 quid a month, super, super cheap. I go through technique like this. Some weeks it's once a week, some weeks it's 5 times a week. It depends how many people submit videos. I go through them, analyse the technique, feedback, everything else that you need to get jacked and strong and massive and happy and live life happily ever after. Right. Next up, we have... Computer's going slow. So we will look at, let's have a change of scenery. Let's not do a bench. Let's do a squat. So we've got Nash. Nash's goal is get stronger. That's pretty cool. Right, so for a squat, the same idea as with the bench. If we want to look at the environment first. So this comes back from, so I'm a medical doctor, believe it or not, a real one, not just someone who put doctor and they're using them. Now, one of the things you're taught to do with medicine is to observe the environment you're in. So when you come to a patient, you're like, right, you can see this patient as a walker, they have an inhaler, they have a pack of cigarettes, they have whatever. You can get a lot from someone's environment. Same thing when you look at the person. So obviously you shouldn't judge people based on looks and whatever, but we do, and it does make things simpler. It's just pattern recognition in your mind. So same thing when looking at lifters. So first thing is we're looking at the environment. So this looks like it's training in like a school sports hall or something like that. It's a decent gym, decent facilities. Next thing with the squat, typically I'm looking at footwear and then I'm looking at belt. So footwear, it looks like we've got some slippers. I believe those are deadlift slippers. So that's a sign to me that you're at least somewhat serious because you've gone to the effort of buying deadlift slippers. Generally, things we want to avoid is running shoes if your goal is absolute max strength. You are probably not going to hurt yourself, but it is just inefficient because of the force transfer through a soft shoe. We want something solid, so either solid or bare feet type shoes. Be careful with socks because you might slip. This is on one of those wooden platforms that as soon as you put any lateral force in, your feet are just going to slip around, risk of injury. You'll notice a lot of my approach is stopping doing the negative things rather than worrying about the positive things, but it is something that's still important. You get a lot of gains from stopping doing the negative. Next thing is belt. We obviously have a lifting belt on here and wrist wraps. They're fine. Now, in terms of the squat itself, now if we're looking at this from a strength perspective, I like using powerlifting just because it's clear, standardized rules. This squat would pass in almost all federations, but not the IPF. Reason for that is the IPF are very, very strict about depth, sometimes I think to a fault, but the rule is the hip crease needs to be below the top of the knee. Your hip crease and your knee, it is not below it. With that said, this angle is not the best one to view depth from. To be safe, I would assume that your depth is not good enough and try and get deeper, to be honest. Now, in terms of the lift itself, obviously we've got a reasonable amount of weight here. I think it's about 435, so about 190 kilos. Now, with the actual squat itself, what ends up happening is, as you come down, your spine position changes 3 times. So it changes on the initiation of the movement. So the first change is, as you brace, which is like a half brace, you lift your shoulders up. So you're bracing through your chest rather than through your middle, through your abdomen. Second thing is when you initiate the squat, you then start to hyperextend your lower back here. You see as your butt comes out. And then the third thing is as you then come out of the squat, your back then flexes back into a neutral position. Now, none of these things are inherently terrible, but each of them individually, if you fix them, will contribute to you feeling a lot more stable through your middle as you squat. So, when you're squatting, there's 3 typical ways of squatting. So, one method is knees first, next is knees and hips, and next is hips. So the hips is what the kids would usually call a pre-hinge. So basically what that is, let me just see if you'll be able to see me doing this. Right, I'm going to stand on this and show you. So, pre-hinge, what you would do is push your hips back first, then bend your knees to squat. This camera's following me around, so that's weird. For knees and hips, they both go at the same time, and then knees first, knees initiate before any hip kind of movement. Now, typically speaking, Olympic weightlifters go knees first because they want to stay as upright as possible. So either Olympic weightlifting, or if you've got really, really short femurs, so your femur is the bone in your thigh, you'll be able to stay a lot more upright. And if you've got super, super flexible ankles, the longer your femurs are and worse your ankle flexibility is, the more likely it is that you're going to need a pre-hinge. So think of it on one end of the spectrum to the other. So long femurs and poor ankle mobility on one end is more likely to need a hinge. All the way to the other end is short femurs, good ankle flexibility, less likely to need to do a hinge, more knee dominant. And then most people fall somewhere in the middle. I personally like a little pre-hinge with my own lifting. Now for yourself, I think that it would benefit you to do a slight pre-hinge. So you already, to a certain extent, do, but as you do it, you initiate the movement with your knees too. I would suggest experimenting with try the pre-hinge first, but as you do it, the important thing is not to extend your back. What you need to do is you need to let your hips come backwards and shoulders come forwards at the same time so that your spine position can stay relatively neutral. This will mean as you come down into the squat, you've not gone from hyperextended into hyperflexed, and it means you get to stay in one, your spine stays essentially in one piece, like your spine's made up of lots of pieces, but it just moves as one unit. That you'll find will help your core feel better, your middle feel better, and then the next thing is obviously your ankles start to collapse in, and part of that is probably due to the fact that for you to get any deeper, you are just running into your knees, your thighs with your stomach. So, combination with the pre-hinge, I would also try and get your knees just a little bit wider. Nothing crazy, I'm talking like, so at the minute, your knees are just about in line with your toes there. I would just try and push them ever so slightly wider so you can get that little bit extra depth. With the bracing, everything will be good, jobs are good, and then you should be fine. Right then, that was Nash. Now let's have a look at, next up we have Tony. We are back to another bench. So Tony's goal is to improve his strength and his mobility. Now we're going to do the same thing again. It's boring, but it works. So we'll look at the environment first. So the first thing, there's lots of assumptions we can make here. So one, we have feet on blocks. That means either he's got some kind of injury or issue, or he's got really, really short legs. Now we can see from the video, he does not, in fact, have really, really short legs. So we assume there's something potentially wrong. Next thing is, we want to look at the height of the bench for unracking. Now we can see here how much his arms are bent just to get hold of this. So the very first thing before we even get to lifting is raise the height of these. You don't want to expend any extra energy lifting the bar to get it into position. It's kind of a waste of time. It's a really, really awkward place to unrack. And what people don't think about with the unracking is your body adapts to what you get it to do. So there's a principle called the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demand. That's why if you, for example, started hanging every single day, over time, eventually you get strong enough to hang with one arm. But when you first started doing it, your fingers and your palms would be sore and they wouldn't be calloused. But if you've trained for years and years and years, you'll have tough skin because your body has adapted to that specific thing. Now, your body will adapt in a general sense and in a specific sense to what it is that you do. So when we're looking at things like the bench press, every rep you do, your body is adapting to that. But also, every time you unrack, your body is adapting to that too. And if you think, say in one bench set, you do 10 reps with 100 kilos, maths, 10 reps with 100 kilos. That's 1,000 kilos of volume, 1,000 kilos of work, telling your body, this is what I want you to adapt to. But you only unracked it once. So you did 100 kilos worth of unracking, and 1,000 kilos of volume. Now, if you extrapolate that over the course of a year, it's a lot of time doing the reps and getting used to these range of motions. So your body specifically will be adapting to these range of motions, to these movements. The unracking, you're not getting used to that. So as you get stronger, you're having to unrack more and more and more with relatively quite a small amount of adaptation. It's the same thing as I said about the range of motion when you accidentally go too far one day and something goes pop. What it means is that if you're out unracking from a really awkward angle, your body's probably not that strong in that really awkward angle, and you'll get to the point either where you hurt yourself unracking, or you just can't unrack it without somebody helping you. And there's nothing wrong with having someone helping you, but you have a bench where you can adjust the height. So just adjust the height, and it's just less stress in an awkward position. So stress is not a bad thing. Stress in an awkward position with a load you're not used to, that can be a negative thing. So that's when things go pop. So those are the things before we even get started with the rep. And then weight-wise, this looks like it's 40 kilos. You've got one plate on the right way and one plate the wrong way. So if you want to be precious about it, powerlifting plates, first plate, the letters face inwards and then they face outwards so that officials can see what's going on. I've heard different reasons for why that's the case. One is that it's to do with sponsorships. One is that it's just so people can see the weights. I don't know. Now, so with bench, the actual reps themselves are not too bad given the point that you're at with your training. So with these reviews, in case I didn't say earlier, can't remember, it's been a while, I will do them to the level of the person that's lifting. So for example, the first review with Tom, relatively advanced, big loads, so we need to look at something a little bit more detailed, looking more at nuances. Whereas say for Tony, not as advanced, but still obviously wanting to progress and stuff, we look for the lowest hanging fruits in these situations. So, first thing is the feet situation. So we want the knee below the hip if possible. Now I did message Tony to ask about this and he said it feels more comfortable. So if it feels more comfortable, fine, I have absolutely no issue with that whatsoever. Sometimes that is a good enough reason. And if you are not looking to compete in powerlifting, you do not need to be maximally efficient with the bench. So I'm going to look at it through the lens of get stronger rather than worrying just about the bench. Next thing is your grip is uber narrow. So what that means is when it comes to your bench width grip, you have three things to think about. So one is the position of your hands on the bar, so the width. Two is then the position of your elbow relative to your side. And then three is the position of your torso, your thoracic spine in relation to the bench. So If you have a narrow grip, what that's going to mean is your elbows are going to either have to tuck in a lot and you're going to touch very low, or your elbows are going to go very wide and you're going to touch higher. And the problem is, if you do that, you end up in a really awkward position with your wrist and you're wasting power, because the way physics works is when you have a joint, the distance from that joint is where the pressure is applied, is where the load is applied. So if you, for example, bench and your grip is like this, say you're benching and you're 50 kilos of force here. If you have a grip where you're at 90 degrees, you still have 50 kilos of force here. So 50 kilos of force on your shoulder there. If you move your grip in here, you still have 50 kilos of force here, but now you have extra force at elbow joint. Same thing if you bring it in here and here and here. So that's why we're looking at things like right angles typically, is because it's more efficient. Now what happens if you go the other way, if you go wider, is now instead of it being 50 kilos of force, it's more like 60 kilos of force, 70 kilos, whatever. So what this means is a balancing act between finding a grip that's wide enough that you're not going backwards, combined with the angle of your elbow, so that again, you're not bending backwards, combined with your thoracic position to change your range of motion. So, when we get stronger, there's 3 stages. Stage 1 is we're learning the technique and the movement. So you go from never benching before, bars all shaky, you can barely lift it, you do 20 kilos for 5 reps, and then 5 minutes later, you do 20 kilos for 10 reps. 5 minutes later, you do 30 kilos for 10 reps. You've not got stronger. All that's happened is your body's started to learn that movement. Now, the more complex that movement, the longer that phase 1 lasts. So say you were teaching a complete beginner how to snatch, it's going to take them a while to be proficient in the movement. Say it was a fixed bicep curl on a machine, it's going to take you a couple of minutes to be proficient in the movement. All you're doing is move that one joint. Phase 2 strength, that's where you go from, say you could bench 60 kilos for 5 and you get up to 80 kilos for 5. So you've got decent technique, it's consistent, it's repeatable. You are getting stronger by virtue of your pecs, shoulders, triceps actually getting stronger, probably bigger as well. This is where, if your goal is strength, you want to spend like 90+% of your time, and this is where the best part of training is for most people. Now, stage 3 is when we're talking powerlifters, and when we're looking at trying to optimize the movement rather than to use the movement to get something out of it. So bench press, the extreme example is crazy arches and range of motions. Now, if you want the best possible bench press, the number on a piece of paper, you want to move the bar as little as possible. So that means bigger arch, typically wider grip, obviously it varies person to person, but this is about being better at bench press, not being stronger. So those are the 3 stages. So we want to get through stage 1 as fast as possible, get to stage 2, spend most time there. If you're going to compete, then we're looking at stage 3. So if we go back to Tom's bench press actually, this is a really good example. Look at how much he's maximised his leverages here. So the range of motion on the bench press there is not much. Still very, very strong, don't get me wrong. I bet he can still bench tons with a big range of motion, but this is a great powerlifting style bench press. Whereas the bench we've got for Tony here, from a strength perspective, is a pretty good bench. From a powerlifting perspective, very, very, very inefficient. Now, if we do want to make it slightly more efficient, but still not go super powerlifting, if you remember what I said about the distances from joints. So we've got the elbows here are bent essentially backwards. So that means there's extra force on the elbow that's not needed. Solution for that, you're going to have to do 2 things. One is your elbow is going to need to come out a little bit, which then means that in order for this force not to still be behind your elbow, your wrist is going to need to come out a little bit as well. So basically all you need to do is increase your grip, probably by about hand width on each side, and then you'll find that in that bottom position there, your elbows would be more like 90-ish degrees rather than bent back on themselves. He also asked me if his arch is too much. I'd honestly say no. I wouldn't even really think about that as being too much of an arch. Your spine is curved anyway, so you typically should be able to see some daylight under your lower back. If it's comfortable, I would potentially consider dropping the blocks and see how they go. And then just as a general point, I'd want to see a lot more control on the reps. So each rep, if we look, right, I'll show you, where's the first rep? So this is the first rep. That is where the end of the bar is. And then if we go to the last rep, look at where the end of the bar is now. So the bar is in a different position. So what that means is the reps are inconsistent, they're different every time. So I would suggest you spend a bit more time in phase one of learning the technique. So what that means is go a little bit slower, try and control the reps more. And what control means, so people talk about controlling the reps, but they don't actually tell you what it means. In my mind, to control the rep, it means that if you had to, you could stop the weight at any point through the movement, because you are stronger isometrically than you are concentrically. So if you are benching and you could not stop the bar part way down, and that's eccentric as well, you are probably going slightly too fast in this phase. I'm not saying when you're training for maximum pure power and speed, but in this phase I'm talking about right now for Tony, you need to be able to stop the bar mid-rep. As you go through the set, your speed gets faster and faster and faster. The accuracy of where the bar is going gets less and less and less. And what I said before about the specific adaptation to imposed demand is you are doing different reps each time, which means you are not getting the adaptation of that one rep consistently enough to get the most out of it. And with this said, this technique is fine. You're probably not going to hurt yourself. It's not going to cause you any problems. It's just not the most efficient. That's all. So this is not me like, this is terrible, you shouldn't do it. If I saw you benching like that in the gym, I'd be like, cool, this guy is obviously relatively serious about training. Fantastic, fantastic. We can see Chris. So, Chris is 3 weeks into the gym, so new. So again, we're going to look at things based on the level that somebody's at. Now Chris's problem is, he told me he feels things typically in his shoulders rather than in his chest. There's a few reasons that can be happening. One reason is, if you're new to training, you probably don't know what things would feel like anyway. So bodybuilders call it a mind-muscle connection. If you can feel that muscle, like when you've been training a while, you can flex. I should be able to see that when I hold my jacket down, shouldn't you? You can flex a muscle without moving. That's the mind-muscle connection. It's just control of where you're at. Now, that's part of it, so you probably don't know what it feels like. But the other part of it can typically be technique. So, we've got a chest press here. Now, when it comes to your chest, your pecs basically have one main function, which is it takes your arm from over there across your body here. It does that as well a little bit from here, and it does that as well a little bit from here. So basically what your pec's job is take your arm away from your body towards your body. What happens from your elbow onwards kind of doesn't matter too much for your pec. So this movement, this movement, this movement, even this movement to a small extent, it's not like a particularly good use, all train your pec. Now, the way to feel your pec, typically, what I would do is to take hold of something with your arm and rotate away from it. Now, as you rotate away from it, you will feel it in one of three places. So one is you'll feel it in your pec. Fantastic. That's your pec muscle. That's what that should feel like. Not when you're exercising, but so you know what the muscle feels like. Two is you will feel it in your shoulder. So you might have a little bit of impingement. You might be feeling your front delt. Three is you will feel it in your bicep. So your bicep might be tight. And we don't want bicep or shoulder when we are doing chest type exercises, typically speaking. There's a time and a place for it, but this is not that time and place. So if you are feeling it in one of these places, chances are it's due to your shoulder position rather than there being a problem with your pec itself. So if you roll your shoulder forwards, so if you rotate it down and then you try and do the stretch, you will find that you just feel it across the front of your shoulder. If you instead go to a neutral position and then you twist, you'll find that you feel it a lot in your pec. If you fully straighten your arm and then twist, you will find that you fully feel it in your bicep. So, this is to feel your pec being stretched. The next step is, when you're doing an exercise, is you want to get into that position and then do what your pec does, of move your arm across your body. So, based on you moving your arm across your body, you will know where you are feeling things and what the problem is. So, if when you do it, you feel it in your shoulder, so it's not 100% of the time, but for most people this will fix it. If you feel it in front of your shoulder, typically it's because your shoulder's rounded forwards. If you feel it in your bicep, typically it's because your arm is straight. So for example, doing a chest press machine, you shouldn't be feeling it in your bicep because your arm is bent. So the next thing is, if you're feeling it in your shoulder, it's probably because your shoulders are rounded forwards. That can cause an issue. And then there is another element it's probably not relevant in this situation, but I will explain it anyway because there might be somebody watching it's relevant to. And that is to do with the position of your rib cage. So if you're massively overarched and you're flared and you go to move your pec, you might not feel as much pec activation as you would otherwise. Some people's posture and the way their rib cage is, it means that if your rib is overly expanded, your pec struggles to essentially pull your humerus around. But like I say, it's a bit of a niche problem, less of a problem than people think it is. So, looking at your presses here, there's a few things we can see so that we know that you are working the right muscles. So one is, if we look at your actual pec there, you can see it contract as you do the rep. You can see your pec there is contracting. So that is a good sign. You can actively see the muscle is working that you're wanting to train. The next thing is, as you come to the reps, right as you get towards the end of the rep, so if I go back ever so slightly, so right as you get towards the end of the rep, you just roll your shoulders forwards a little bit. So watch here, watch your shoulder, this shoulder, ready and round, just at the end there. So there's two common things that make that obvious. One is you can just see the shoulder rounded. It's not very obvious there, but two is your head comes forward, so everything's tight here. So solutions to this are real simple. Solution number one is don't quite go as deep. For everybody else watching who is not new, you should be going relatively deep on presses, as long as it doesn't cause you any issues, it's safe, consistent, repeatable. However, he's very, very new. Chris is brand new to training. We don't want him to get hurt in his first month in the gym. So what I would potentially do is reduce the range of motion ever so slightly at first when you are doing your heavier work, when you are pushing close to failure. And the second thing is I would do some slightly lighter work and try and get into that deep range of motion. But as you get into that deep range of motion, make an effort to open up your chest. But this is the thing with the ribs. But as you do it, don't want you to start arching your back more and more and more. Because we're not trying to be powerlifters here. 3 weeks in, just want to get stronger and fitter. What you want to do is try and keep your shoulders where they are, but let your hands come deeper. Hold yourself there, 2-3 second pause, and then do your reps like that. And I think the combination of those two, and then the fact you haven't been training very long, they will help you get used to the feel of your pecs. And then finally, the other thing you can do is basically a bit of posing. So I'm not suggesting you have to go full bodybuilder, but what you can do is if you put your hands on your hips. So the way I learned this was, medical doctor, at med school, you have to do so many different competencies, learn to take blood, cannulas, whatever. You have to do certain examinations. One of the examinations you have to do, breast exam. You need to feel, as part of a breast exam, the muscle. So the way that you get people to do it, typically speaking, a breast exam is done on a woman. Typically speaking, most of the women that you see for a breast exam, at least when I went through medicine, 50-plus-year-old women, never trained in their life, so they don't know how to flex their pecs. So if you go and ask your mum or your grandma, do you know how to flex your pecs? Most of the time, the answer is no. So the way that we got taught to get people to do it, so you could feel this area, is you put your hands on your hips and you squeeze. That's it. So you put your hands on your hips and you squeeze your hands in. That will make your pec flex. So again, it's that movement of drawing your arm in towards your body. Then you'll be able to feel what your pecs feel like. So what you can do is either away from the gym if you don't do it at the gym, or between your sets, you can get used to that feeling of flexing your pecs. So you know what it feels like, so that then you know what it should feel like with your pecs when you're exercising. Those would be the things that I'd be looking at. In terms of this, it's hard to go wrong on the chest press machine, so you're doing well on that. And basically, you just need to keep going. You're doing very well. You've done the hardest bit, which is getting started. So you just need to keep going with it, keep consistent with it, and then obviously over time you will keep getting stronger and stronger. Now, I am just going to triple check the chat here, see if there's any more questions. Does not look like we have any more questions. So next up, I am going to just check. I had a couple of questions on the Q&A that I posted earlier. So, actually, I will take Chris off the screen. So first question was, best troubleshooting for proper deadlifting, abdominal bracing with belt. Hell hurts in diaphragm. So let me just move this around so you can see it's a bit better. There we go. Then, in technology, great, eh? So, belt is hurting your diaphragm, basically. First thing is, how do you know that you've hurt your diaphragm? Because there's so many other things that are going on in there. I will try not to be cynical and assume that that's true. So, my first thought is your belt is probably too high. So, if your belt is pinching you, it's uncomfortable, it's either it's too high or it's too tight, typically. So those are the user errors. So when you are deadlifting with a belt, I like people, the less advanced they are, the looser the belt wants to be. It's there as a reminder to brace into it. As you get more advanced, you might actually use the belt to actively help you to brace as you do it. But when you are first starting, you want it to be a bit looser so you get used to it. The next thing is, as you get more advanced, the typical thing that most people say should be able to get 2 fingers inside. Now, with that, it means that there's enough room for you to breathe, but still brace into it, still relatively tight. So, you often find you get into an awkward position when you are changing weights, of where you might have one belt size that's too big, one belt size that's too small. What I would usually suggest people do is go for the belt size that is too big, but wear a hoodie, so that you then are basically effectively bridging the gap just with a hoodie instead. Now, that's a simple solution for that, but the actual physiological problems, the user execution errors with the belt, typically speaking, you could be bracing wrong. So one, you're bracing up into your chest, so you're changing the size of your rib cage as you're bracing rather than your middle. And the second one is you're bracing in the wrong order. So if you take the slack out of the bar and then brace, you will find that your belt pinches you, because as you take the slack out of the bar, you will effectively make your back and your lats a little bit bigger, because you will flex them a little bit as you get into position. Some people do a relaxed brace. It's not very common. I'm going to talk to the lowest common denominator, which is a flex brace. If you brace, if you pull the slack out of the bar, then you brace, you'll find an awkward position where your skin will get caught up in the belt as well, so that can become uncomfortable. And then the other time people get a problem is when they've just got too much extra fat that just gets stuck under the belt. In that circumstance, I would suggest wearing something under the belt, so say something more material based, just to make it more comfortable. All right, let's have a look at the chat, see what we have on here. I had loads of people joining this, which is very good. Now, my plan for these is I will be doing these live YouTubes I'm going to see how often I get enough people to submit their technique for review. So if you want your technique reviewing, on Instagram, DM me tech1, all needs to be one word. There's an automation setup that will send you over a link. You can submit your technique for review. I will go through it like this on this format. If you want me to do it privately, you have to be a client. Sorry. 1 free technique review per person. Otherwise, I'm not going to have any time to look after my actual clients. If you want to work with me, 2 main options. One is Basics But Better, 50 quid a month. You get your technique reviewed like this regularly, access to programs, nutrition plan, Q&As, Monday to Friday. Everything's in there. If you want to do that, DM me, BBB, stands for Basics But Better, or go to ascperformance.com, or you can work with me on a one-to-one basis. If you want to do that, that is by invite only, is that the right word? Interview only. I have 1 space in February. Next space after that will be about the 13th, 14th of March. Whatever the third Monday in March is, will be the next time to start for that. If you're interested in any of that, send me a DM on Instagram, email me, whatever. Last check of the live stream, and then that should be it.